Well, I'm Miss Bonnie Parker, and this here's Mr. Clyde Barrow. We rob banks.
Now, if everybody will just take it easy, nobody will get hurt.
Bonnie and Clyde, 1967, wasn't supposed to survive Hollywood. It was too violent, too sexually provocative, too morally gray, and too defiant toward the system that funded it. But instead of collapsing, it detonated like a live charge buried beneath the foundation of Hollywood tradition. Behind the camera, there were script wars, executive threats, frightened investors, and cast members who walked around feeling like the ghosts of the real Bonnie and Clyde were watching them. And stay with me until the very last second, because the final bonus fact nearly destroyed Warren Beatty's career before the film ever reached a single paying viewer. Here are 20 weird, dark, and disturbingly real facts about Bonnie and Clyde, 1967, and they feel stranger than legend. Before we begin, tell me something in the comments. What country are you watching from? I want to know how far this legend has traveled across the world. Fact 1. This decision nearly got the film canceled before cameras ever rolled. In the earliest conception of the story, Clyde Barrow wasn't simply a charismatic outlaw. He was written as bisexual, entangled in an emotionally complex triangle that challenged 1960s sexual norms. In a decade terrified of anything deviating from traditional masculinity, this wasn't bold, it was explosive. When Warren Beatty joined the project, he recoiled at the implications, and studio executives nearly had a meltdown. They warned that the film would be banned, condemned, or even boycotted by conservative groups. There were heated meetings, whispered threats, rewrites done in paranoia, and finally the sexuality was stripped away, erased into subtext. Ironically, what was removed might have made it the most progressive character portrait of its era, but the studio wasn't thinking of artistic legacy, only of shielding themselves from scandal.
Well, now, look here. We're in the custody of Captain Frank Hammer, and Frank here's a Texas Ranger.
Sure enough he is. Hey there, peacemaker. I believe you got your spurs all tangled up there, haven't you? Huh?
Fact 2. A real gun got pointed at Warren Beatty, and this wasn't in the script. During filming in rural Texas, Warren Beatty stepped outside wearing Bonnie and Clyde attire. Full costume, prop gun, swagger. To the crew, it was just another setup for a shot. But to one local man, steeped in the memory of the real historical outlaws, it looked horrifyingly genuine. Without hesitation, he raised a loaded shotgun and aimed it directly at Beatty's chest. There was no cinematic slow motion, no dramatic soundtrack, only the paralytic knowledge that one twitch of a finger might end everything. The crew screamed and waved their arms, frantically explaining that this wasn't an actual robbery. Eventually, the man dropped the weapon, muttering skepticism. Beatty later tried to turn it into a humorous anecdote, but those who witnessed it remember something different. The raw human awareness of mortality and the understanding that the line between recreation and reality had dissolved for one terrifying moment.
All right, you keep it, Tim. Next time I'll aim a little lower.
Fact 3. This prop wasn't a replica, it was a real piece of death. The car used for the final ambush in the film wasn't pristine, polished, or fabricated in Hollywood's mechanical workshops. It had genuine bullet scarring, fractures and punctures created by real ballistic impacts. When actors stepped inside it, they weren't entering a set piece. They were stepping into something close to a tomb. Cast members later described a heavy stillness inside the vehicle, as if the violence soaked into its frame had never quite evaporated. Faye Dunaway reportedly felt a tingling in her skin sitting inside it, an atmosphere that didn't feel fabricated or theatrical, but residual. Being inside that car was like walking into the echo of a massacre. And when cameras rolled, something in the performers shifted. The energy in their eyes wasn't merely character embodiment. It was a reaction to the aura of a place where metal had truly met murder. Fact 4. When the production arrived in Texas, they weren't stepping into a nostalgic postcard. They were trespassing into living memory. The locals remembered Bonnie and Clyde not as romantic rebels, but as unapologetic killers. They remembered funerals. They remembered fear. Some elderly residents refused to rent property, withheld cooperation, or voiced bitterness with cutting clarity. Those two weren't heroes. They were monsters. This wasn't academic criticism. It was personal. The crew soon realized they weren't filming a myth on neutral ground. They were filming a myth on soil still scarred by real events. Every street corner had stories. Every building had whispers. For Hollywood, it was entertainment. For Texas, it was history, still stained with grief. And that tension haunted the entire shoot.
She's gonna talk that way when she's right there in the next room.
There is always somebody in the next room, in this room, or in every other kind of room.
Fact 5. Dunaway's costume, elegant on camera, was a physical trap off camera. The skirts were restrictive, the fabric unforgiving, and the movement constricted. But the script demanded running, sprinting, scrambling urgently through dust, buildings, vehicles, and terrain. She stumbled repeatedly, slammed into set pieces, scraped her limbs, and hit her body hard enough to leave real bruises that later appeared on film. These weren't cosmetic injuries applied with a brush. They were real flesh impacts. Dunaway never weaponized the discomfort or demanded sympathy. She absorbed the pain and used it as emotional fuel. Her performance carried the grit of lived struggle. There's a certain wild desperation in her physicality on screen, and you can feel it, because every bruise wasn't an illusion. It was a price.
Well, I'm Miss Bonnie Parker, and this here's Mr. Clyde Barrow. We rob banks.
When filming the infamous final ambush, the actors weren't facing harmless spark effects. They were surrounded by explosive squibs, timed with ruthless precision. But one of those charges detonated prematurely, erupting near Faye Dunaway's face with dangerous force. For a fraction of a second, she wasn't Bonnie Parker. She was a terrified human being with death flashing in her peripheral vision. You can see a flicker of real panic in her eyes before she forces herself back into the flow of the scene. The set froze after the shot, the stunt crew sprinting toward her, but Dunaway waved them away, insisting she was fine. That final sequence, the ballet of carnage, is unforgettable because so much of the fear in it wasn't acting. If timing had been half a second worse, the movie might have ended with a literal tragedy. Fact 7. Arthur Penn didn't want glamorous Depression-era gangsters. He wanted bodies that smelled like desperation and sweat. The actors received an unusual instruction: minimize bathing, avoid fresh clothing, let the dust accumulate on their skin and in their hair. The intent wasn't just texture, it was psychological immersion. When the cast felt unclean, sticky, and sun-baked, their posture, movements, and temperament subtly changed. They embodied characters who lived in stolen cars, cramped hideouts, and roadside scrub. The grime on their skin wasn't cosmetic, it was authentic. It affected how they breathed, how they carried themselves, how they spoke. When you watch those scenes, you are not seeing elegant Hollywood criminals gliding through pristine sets. You are witnessing exhausted fugitives, worn down by weight, heat, and fatigue. The Dust Bowl wasn't just a setting, it became part of their anatomy.
I want to see my mama. I want to see my mama.
Please, honey, don't never leave me without saying nothing.
Fact 8. During scenes with sudden gunfire, the background actors weren't always briefed about exactly when the blanks would discharge. When those explosions erupted unexpectedly, the extras flinched, ducked, and recoiled instinctively. Their reactions weren't measured or performance crafted. They were primal reflexes, the mind's ancient response to perceived danger. The effect is eerie. The screen teems with a realism that no amount of scripted direction could produce. To modern viewers, those faces look like brilliant acting. But to those present, they were watching real human bodies respond to shock and fear. Hollywood often prides itself on illusion. But here, the illusion was unnecessary. The fear was real. The chaos was genuine. And the tension that crackles through those sequences is born not from performance, but from the raw electricity of human instinct colliding with a staged gunfight. Fact 9. The beret now feels inseparable from Bonnie Parker, an immortal trademark of criminal elegance. But for Dunaway, it was a burden she resented. She loathed the accessory, muttering curses at it between takes, hurling it aside, occasionally kicking it in frustration. She feared being reduced from actor to symbol, from character to costume. Yet destiny had already made its choice. Today, that beret is a cinematic relic, instantly recognizable across generations. The irony? The thing she despised became her most visually iconic attribute. When people mimic Bonnie Parker for costume parties, parodies, posters, or fan art. They don't think Faye Dunaway's performance. They think the beret. If Dunaway could have predicted that a single piece of cloth would follow her throughout her career, she might have burned it on set.
Blanche is married to Buck. Buck is family.
My family could use some of that money.
Now, you know how them laws been hanging around your mama's house till all hours. It's too risky to go up there now.
Where can we go now? We rob the damn banks. What else do we do?
Well, what you want to do, Clyde?
Fact 10. When Bonnie and Clyde first screened for audiences, their reaction was not uniform. It was emotional whiplash. The opening scenes carried lightness and flirtation. The early robberies seemed mischievous, almost playful. Some viewers chuckled, entertained by the seductive outlaw bravado. But then came the shift, not gradual, but brutal. Gunfire, blood spray, bodies jerking with impact. The laughter collapsed, replaced by stunned quiet. In those moments, the audience wasn't watching anti-heroes. They were witnessing execution. The silence was so profound that it unnerved the producers. Viewers felt manipulated, seduced with charm, then struck with brutality. That contrast became the soul of the film's power. It forced viewers to confront their own moral complicity, cheering outlaws only to be slapped with the horror of their violence. Fact 11. At one early screening, a theater manager, someone who had seen thousands of films, who believed he was desensitized to cinematic violence, watched the final ambush unfold and quietly collapsed to the floor. Staff rushed to help him, stunned that a fictional death scene could spark such a visceral physical reaction. But Bonnie and Clyde didn't treat death as spectacle. It treated it as execution. The sequence wasn't fast. It wasn't sanitized. It was slow, almost ritualistic, forcing the viewer to endure every convulsion of the onslaught. People weren't used to seeing bullet impacts as trauma rather than an entertainment. In an era of implied violence, this was graphic reality. When the man regained consciousness, he reportedly mumbled, "I wasn't prepared for that. No one was." That moment was proof that the film crossed an emotional threshold Hollywood hadn't yet dared approach.
They get rid of her.
I can't do it. She's Buck's wife.
Well, then get rid of them both.
Why? What's the matter with you anyway?
She is what's the matter with me. She's nothing but a dumb, stupid backcountry.
Now you look.
Fact 12. Warner Brothers executives were deeply uncomfortable with Clyde's impotence. They viewed masculinity as a crucial marketable asset. The male lead had to be dominant, sexually capable, physically confident. Yet Clyde Barrow was written with fragility, insecurity, and subtle emotional damage. To the studio, this was dangerous. Make him stronger, make him a lover, make him a man, they insisted. But the filmmakers refused to rebuild Clyde into a conventional macho archetype. They believed his vulnerability made him more complex, more human, and far more tragic. In a time when Hollywood feared anything that deviated from masculine norms, Bonnie and Clyde presented a protagonist who wasn't sexually invincible. He was wounded, and that discomfort lingered. The studio never forgave the creative team for denying audiences a manly gangster. But today, that choice is part of what made the film ahead of its time.
You think if I sent that into newspapers they'd print it? I'm gonna do it.
Now, Bonnie and Clyde are the Barrow Gang. I'm sure you all have read how they rob and steal, and those who squeal are usually found dying or dead.
Fact 13. Before Arthur Penn ever touched the project, the script floated toward the creators of Cinematic Rebellion, the French New Wave. Directors like Jean-Luc Godard were approached. Imagine Clyde framed through jagged jump cuts, Bonnie whispering existential poems, the violence depicted as surreal abstraction instead of gritty realism. Godard turned it down, irritated by the idea of filming in America instead of Europe. Another new wave figure drifted from interest to disinterest. For a moment, the film seemed like an orphan, too radical for Hollywood, too American for French radicals. Only when Penn stepped in, grounded, decisive, and fearless, did the project finally gain weight. And ironically, Penn achieved what the new wave might have: cinematic disruption. Bonnie and Clyde became the film that shattered Hollywood's rules, even though the very directors known for breaking film language declined to participate. Fact 14. Before Faye Dunaway stepped into legend, Natalie Wood was courted for the role. She met with producers, discussed the part, and considered the exposure and acclaim it might bring. But Wood was dealing with private emotional struggles and chose not to accept a role that demanded raw aggression, sexual complexity, and psychological intensity. Had she accepted, the entire tone of Bonnie would have shifted, less enigmatic, more vulnerable in a different register. Fate intervened. Dunaway got the role, and her mixture of cold elegance and dangerous allure became inseparable from the film's identity. Natalie Wood moved on. Hollywood history realigned. And another life lesson emerged. Sometimes the roles we refuse define us as much as those we accept.
You've heard of a woman's glory being spent on a downright curve.
Did you write all that yourself?
And do you want to hear this or not?
Fact 15. During production, Warner Brothers tried repeatedly and aggressively to stop the film or cut it down beyond recognition. They feared controversy. They feared backlash. They feared bad press. Most of all, they feared losing money. Warren Beatty refused every attempt at dilution. He challenged executives in meetings, absorbed insults, overrode demands, and argued until voices cracked and tempers blew. The film could have been stopped at any of those junctures. But Beatty shielded it like a zealot guarding forbidden scripture. He wasn't merely acting. He was fighting for a vision. If he had yielded just once, Bonnie and Clyde might have faded into oblivion as another neutered studio product. Instead, it tore through cinematic culture like a ruptured artery because one stubborn actor refused to kneel.
Sheriff!
Whoa! Whoa! I don't see that shooting!
All right. All right, now you just get on right over that car.
Fact 16. Warren Beatty didn't just star in the film. He lived inside it like a controlling spirit. He scrutinized every detail. The framing of shots, the pace of editing, the specific shade of color in a costume seam, even the punctuation on promotional materials. Crew members joked with weary sarcasm, "We're not making Bonnie and Clyde, we're making Beatty and Beatty." Some found him infuriating, some admired the intensity, but all recognized one thing: his obsession created consistency. Every choice felt deliberate, not accidental. Beatty wasn't protecting ego, he was protecting tone. If the violence was too theatrical, the film would fail. If the romance was too glossy, the film would collapse. His relentless oversight forged a singular atmosphere, one that felt dirty, doomed, beautiful, and fatalistic. That obsessive control may have exhausted the crew, but it gave the film its soul.
How about that now? Ain't you something? I tell you. Look, I'm gonna get you Smith & Wesson. Gonna go in your hand easy.
Yeah.
Now, I want you to try something now. How do you?
Fact 17. The final sequence, the ambush, is already haunting, but the original plan was bolder. Complete silence. No score. Not a single musical tone to cushion the horror. Just the wind, the dust, and the muted thud of life leaving bodies. It would have been an execution carried out in emotional vacuum, a void of empathy where death is final, unceremonious, and lonely. Even brutal films often use music to cathartically guide the viewer, to tell them how to feel. But here, the absence of sound would have forced the audience to feel without instruction, to drown in raw shock. Ultimately, the filmmakers added minimal ambient sound to soften the blow slightly. But even now, you can sense the silence that was almost left behind. It's as if the ghost of that quiet ending still breathes through the scene, like a lingering echo of death.
There ain't no money here.
What you talking about? This here's a bank, ain't it?
It was a bank, but we failed 3 weeks ago.
Fact 18. Too often, period films romanticize poverty, giving dust a glow and hardship a stylish sheen. Bonnie and Clyde rejected that glamorization. The cast wore clothes that were intentionally stale, wrinkled, and weather-worn. Their skin absorbed sweat and oil. Their faces reflected exhaustion rather than elegance. Their bodies didn't glide through scenes. They trudged, slouched, and leaned as though gravity itself was anchoring them to a hard life. Bonnie isn't radiant. She's sunburned. Clyde isn't sleek. He's dusty and dehydrated. This wasn't fashion. It was authenticity. The characters looked like people without access to showers, hair products, laundry, or comfort. Watching the film, you can almost smell the grit embedded into leather seats and cotton collars. This wasn't Hollywood playing dress-up. This was a cinematic immersion into the tactile reality of outlaw survival.
Good afternoon. This is the Barrow Gang. Now, if everybody will just take it easy, nobody will get hurt.
Fact 19. Rather than constructing artificial sets or recreating 1930s America on a Hollywood backlot, the filmmakers went to the real terrain where Bonnie and Clyde once breathed, fled, and hid. Some of the small towns hadn't changed physically in decades. The same storefronts, the same brick walls, the same rural dust roads. People who lived there had heard first-hand stories from their parents and grandparents. Some had even witnessed events tied to the real criminals. Shooting on those locations gave the film a strange resonance, a ghostly authenticity. It was as if the camera was capturing not just the actors, but the memory of the land itself. The wind in those scenes isn't just weather, it's history. The silence between lines isn't just pacing, it's respect for the reality buried beneath the fiction. Fact 20. Before Bonnie and Clyde, Hollywood was shackled by the outdated production code, a set of moral restrictions that demanded crime be punished, sex be sanitized, violence be obscured, and moral clarity be preserved. But Bonnie and Clyde dared to blur every boundary. The criminals were likable, the violence was graphic, the morality was ambiguous, and the ending didn't serve justice, it served shock. Critics were torn between condemnation and admiration. Younger audiences, meanwhile, devoured it. Thrilled by its defiance, the old censorship system couldn't withstand the cultural force of films like this. It cracked, crumbled, and finally collapsed, giving birth to the MPAA rating system and ushering in New Hollywood, where directors could experiment, provoke, and challenge. In other words, Bonnie and Clyde pulled the trigger on the death of old Hollywood.
Hey, isn't that Malcolm there?
Bonus fact. Before release, Beatty was anxious, even frightened. He had sunk his credibility and reputation into this film. He told close friends, "This will either be the end of me or the beginning." If audiences rejected it, he'd be labeled reckless, arrogant, too experimental, too political. But when the film hit screens, young adults flocked to it like pilgrims to a forbidden temple. Beatty didn't just avoid career destruction, he ascended into cultural prominence. He wasn't merely an actor anymore. He became a symbol of the new era in filmmaking. His gamble paid off. The bullet he feared never struck him. Instead, it annihilated the restraints of the old industry and crowned him as one of its revolutionaries. Bonnie and Clyde began as a risky experiment, resisted by executives, doubted by traditionalists, and shadowed by real historical trauma. But through relentless artistic conviction, dangerous realism, and an unapologetic portrayal of violence, it emerged as one of the most transformative American films ever made. It didn't ask for approval, it demanded reaction. And it received it. If you love exploring the hidden corridors of Hollywood, the secrets behind productions, the scandals buried in film history, and the real human costs of cinematic ambition, then subscribe. Because we're just getting started. And now I want to hear from you. Which of these facts changed the way you see the film? Which moment struck you hardest? Tell me in the comments. And welcome to a channel that doesn't just talk about movies. It digs up the ghosts inside them.